Alarms are screaming through the station before I even open my eyes. Red light floods my small bunk room, and the floor shakes so hard that my boots slide off the shelf and hit the wall. I grab my jacket and run into the corridor, where a dozen people in uniforms from a dozen different worlds are already shouting over each other. My name is Noah Bennett, and 3 hours ago I was just a logistics officer counting crates of oxygen filters. Now the entire station is in a panic because something out in the debris field has just lit up like a second sun. I push through the crowd toward the observation deck, where Colonel Grace Whitfield is standing with her arms crossed, staring out through the reinforced glass. She does not turn around when I reach her side. "Look at it," she says quietly. I look. Hanging in the black, wrapped in broken rock and frozen dust, is a ship unlike anything I have ever seen. It is enormous, easily 10 times the length of our station, shaped like a curved blade of dark metal that seems to drink the starlight instead of reflecting it. Lines of pale blue light trace along its hull in patterns that look almost alive, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat that has been sleeping for a very long time and has just now remembered how to beat. "Sensors say it's over 60,000 years old," Grace says, "older than anything we've ever found. Older than anything anyone has ever found." "Is it active?" I ask. "It wasn't," she says, "until about 10 minutes ago. Down in the docking bay, technicians are already suiting up, and news of the discovery is spreading faster than anyone can control. Within an hour, every private channel on the station is jammed with chatter. Within 2 hours, ships from outside our jurisdiction start arriving, first in ones and twos, then in formations too large to count. By the time the sun would have risen, if we still had one to measure by, the debris field is surrounded. I stand at the edge of the crowd in the main hangar, holding a data pad I don't even remember picking up, watching as flags and insignias I only recognize from history briefings fill the display. The Caliph Dominion sends 3 warships, their hulls painted in gold and black, escorting a shuttle marked with the royal seal of Emperor Vareth Solmane. The Ven Matriarchy arrives next, sleek silver vessels moving in perfect formation, carrying Matriarch Issa Kire, whose bloodline is said to stretch back further than most planets have had oceans. Even the Shrath hegemony sends a delegation, cold and quiet, led by Warlord Krixdoth, a name that makes half the room go silent when it's announced. Every empire that matters is here, and every single one of them wants the same thing. They want the ship. I turn to the officer next to me, a young woman named Ellen Marsh who works in communications, and ask her what's actually happening, because nobody has bothered to tell the rest of us anything. "They found ancient texts near the wreck," she says, keeping her voice low. "Fragments. Old enough that even the Caliph archivists needed weeks to translate them properly. The texts say the ship will only wake for someone it judges worthy. They're calling it the Trial of Awakening." "Worthy of what?" I ask. "Nobody knows," she says. "That's what scares them the most." I laugh, quietly, more out of nerves than humor. Somehow I doubt they're inviting logistics officers to try their luck. Ellen doesn't laugh back. She just looks at me with an expression that says, I clearly haven't understood the size of what's happening around us. "Humanity wasn't invited to any of this," she says. "We only found the debris field first, and even that was an accident. If it weren't for that old survey ship stumbling into the wrong sector 18 months ago, none of the big powers would even know this place existed. We're allowed to stand here and watch, Noah. That's it. That's our whole role in this." Her words settle into me slower than I expect, and by the time I fully understand them, the first alien shuttle has already docked with the ancient ship. Over the next several hours, delegates from every arriving faction pass close to where our human crew has been stationed, mostly ignoring us the way you ignore furniture. I watch Emperor Vareth Solmane walk past, in armor plated with something that glows faintly gold, flanked by guards twice his height. I watch Matriarch Issa Kire glide by without her feet appearing to touch the floor, her eyes the color of deep water, calm in a way that feels less like peace and more like absolute control. I watch Warlord Krixdoth pass without a single word to anyone, his presence alone enough to make even seasoned soldiers step back. Each of them boards a shuttle, bound for the ancient vessel, one after another, each certain that they will be the one chosen. I am ordered, along with most of the human crew, to remain on standby in the cargo section of our station, monitoring supply lines and keeping records of incoming and outgoing shuttles. It's the kind of job nobody notices until it's done wrong, and I've done it long enough to know that today it means I'll be watching history unfold through a screen instead of a window. Still, I can't stop myself from checking the open channel every few minutes, listening as reports come in from observers stationed closer to the ancient ship. The first attempt is Emperor Vareth Solman. His voice, translated and broadcast to every listening ship in the debris field, is full of confidence as he steps onto the vessel's bridge and places his hand against what the reports describe as a central console shaped like an open palm. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, according to the broadcast, the pale blue lights along the console flicker once, twice, and go dark. The Emperor is rejected. Not with violence, not with any warning at all. The ship's systems simply refuse to respond to him, as if he were never there. His guards escort him back to his shuttle in silence, and for the first time since I arrived, I hear something in the surrounding chatter that sounds almost like disbelief. The matriarch tries next. Then the warlord. Then delegates from empires I don't even recognize by name, each one boarding with certainty, each one returning in a shuttle full of silence. By the time 6 attempts have failed, the mood across every channel has changed completely. What began as excitement curdles into suspicion. I hear voices accusing rival factions of sabotage, of interfering with each other's trials, of hiding some secret method that the others haven't been told. Ships that arrived in loose formation begin drifting closer together, weapons still powered down, but barely. Grace calls a meeting of the human crew leads in a cramped briefing room near the cargo bay, and I'm allowed in only because someone needs to take notes on the supply situation. She stands at the head of the table, arms crossed again, watching the same reports scroll across a shared screen. "They're getting nervous," she says. 7 of the most powerful people in known space have just been publicly rejected by a machine older than their entire civilizations. That's not something proud empires forgive easily. "Should we be worried?" someone asks. Grace doesn't answer right away. She just watches the screen as an 8th shuttle, carrying another delegate whose name I don't catch, docks with the ancient vessel. "We should be careful," she finally says. "Whatever that ship is looking for, nobody in this room understands it yet." And when powerful people don't understand something, they usually decide the safest answer is to take it by force instead. The meeting ends without any real decisions being made, mostly because there isn't much a handful of logistics and maintenance officers can do to influence a fleet of alien warships. I'm sent back to the cargo bay to continue processing supply manifests, half listening to the open channel, half trying to keep my hands steady while I work. An hour passes, then another. Delegate after delegate steps aboard the ancient ship, offers whatever proof of worth their culture considers highest, and is turned away without explanation. By the time the 9th attempt fails, something changes in the tone of the broadcasts. The Caliph commentator, usually calm and formal, sounds openly frustrated. The Ven channel goes completely silent for several minutes before resuming with clipped, careful language. Even the usually unreadable Shrath transmissions carry an edge of something that might be anger. I finish stacking the last crate of the shift and lean against the cool metal wall, staring at nothing in particular, turning the day's events over in my mind. A dozen god kings and empresses, each carrying bloodlines and empires stretching back thousands of years, standing in front of one silent machine and being told, without a single word, that they are not enough. What could possibly be looking for something that none of them have? I wonder aloud, mostly to myself. Ellen Marsh, passing by with a datapad of her own, overhears me and pauses. "Maybe it's not looking for something they don't have," she says. "Maybe it's looking for something they all have too much of." I don't understand what she means, not fully, not yet. But the thought stays with me long after she walks away, long after the shift ends, long after I return to my bunk and lie awake listening to the distant hum of the station's engines. Somewhere out there, wrapped in broken rock and old starlight, an ancient intelligence is quietly rejecting every powerful being who dares to approach it, and not one of them seems to understand why. I fall asleep still thinking about it, with no idea that within a single day I will be standing in front of that same silent machine myself, utterly unprepared, and that the answer everyone else has been searching for will turn out to be standing quietly in the last place anybody thought to look. The next morning arrives without an actual sunrise, since the station orbits nothing warm enough to give us one, but the lighting cycles shift anyway, brightening the corridors just enough to signal a new day. I wake to find the mood on board has shifted overnight from tense excitement into something colder and more careful. Reports say 22 attempts have now failed, 22 of the most powerful, gifted, and celebrated individuals from a dozen empires, each rejected by the same silent machine, each returning to their ships with nothing to show for it but bruised pride and, in a few cases, open anger directed at anyone nearby. Grace briefs the human crew again before the day's shift begins, standing in front of a display showing the current positions of every allied and rival fleet in the debris field. "Command wants us focused entirely on logistics today," she says. "No sightseeing, no wandering toward the observation windows, no unnecessary chatter on shared channels. Given how things are escalating out there, the last thing we need is attention pointed our way." "Understood," someone says, and the rest of us nod along, even though half of us, myself included, are quietly relieved that at least someone official has finally admitted things are escalating. I spend the morning exactly the way I spend most mornings, moving supply crates between storage bays, checking manifests against actual inventory, resolving small discrepancies that nobody outside this room will ever hear about. It is, by any measure, an unremarkable way to spend a morning while history is happening less than 100 kilometers away. And yet I can't stop thinking about Ellen's words from the day before. Maybe it's looking for something they all have too much of. I turn the thought over while stacking crates, while checking pressure seals, while filling out reports nobody will read closely. What do an emperor, a matriarch, and a warlord all have in common, besides power? What trait connects bloodlines stretching back 10,000 years with military conquest and psychic mastery? I don't have an answer by the time my shift ends, and honestly, I don't expect one. I'm not a scholar or a strategist. I'm a logistics officer whose biggest daily challenge is making sure oxygen filters arrive where they're supposed to, which is exactly why nobody expects what happens next, least of all me. The trouble starts during the handoff between shifts, in the crowded corridor connecting the cargo bay to the administrative section of the station. I'm carrying a supply manifest that needs to reach an officer 2 decks up, a routine errand that should take no more than 10 minutes. Except the corridor is packed tighter than usual, full of officers from at least 4 different species trying to move in 4 different directions at once. And somewhere in the crush of bodies, 2 delegations that clearly do not like each other end up shoulder to shoulder. I don't see how it starts. One moment, there's simply too much tension in too small a space, and the next moment, there's shouting, and then there's shoving, and then the overhead lights flicker as someone activates a personal shield generator far too close to the corridor's power conduits. The crowd surges, and I get swept sideways through an open hatch I hadn't even noticed, stumbling into a narrower connecting corridor that leads, according to the small sign bolted beside the door, toward the primary docking arm. Behind me, the shouting grows louder, and someone yells a warning in a language I don't understand but recognize as urgent regardless. I don't wait to find out what's happening. I keep moving forward, manifest still clutched in one hand, looking for the nearest way back to a section of the station I actually recognize. The corridor curves, narrows further, and opens suddenly onto a boarding platform I have never seen before, one clearly built for shuttles, far larger than the small transports our human crew typically uses. And docked at the platform, close enough that I could reach out and touch its hull, is a shuttle marked with symbols I don't recognize, its boarding ramp lowered and completely unattended. I freeze, manifest still in hand, staring at the open ramp. Every instinct tells me to turn around immediately and find another way back to where I'm supposed to be. Instead, the sound of the crowd behind me grows louder, closer, more chaotic, and for reasons I can't fully explain even now, I step onto the ramp instead of away from it, just to put a solid door between myself and whatever is unraveling in the corridor behind me. The moment I'm inside, the ramp begins to rise on its own, sealing shut behind me with a soft mechanical hiss. I spin around, already reaching for the door controls, but they don't respond to my touch. Through the small viewport set into the hull, I watch the boarding platform slide away as the shuttle detaches and begins moving, smoothly and without any input from me, toward open space. This is not my shuttle, I say out loud, to absolutely no one, because there is no one else aboard to hear me. The shuttle continues forward regardless, gliding past the chaos of the debris field, weaving between much larger warships with a precision that suggests it is following a very specific set of instructions from somewhere. I try every panel I can reach, searching for any kind of manual override, any way to signal for help, but the controls remain dark and unresponsive beneath my hands. Whatever is guiding this shuttle, it clearly is not interested in my input. Through the viewport, the ancient vessel grows larger with every passing second, its dark blade-shaped hull swallowing more and more of the starfield ahead, its pale blue lights pulsing steadily along seams that seem to run the entire length of its body. I press my palm flat against the cold viewport glass, heart pounding hard enough that I can feel it in my throat, and watch as the small shuttle carrying me, uninvited and completely unprepared, drifts directly toward the one machine that has already rejected 22 of the most powerful beings in known space. Whatever happens next, I think, gripping the manifest so tightly the edges crumple in my fist, I clearly no longer have any say in the matter. The shuttle slows as it approaches a docking arm jutting from the ancient vessel's hull, a long metal arm lined with the same pale blue light that traces every seam of the ship's body. I press against the viewport, watching the light grow brighter as we draw closer, until the glow fills the small cabin entirely, washing everything in a soft, steady color that reminds me, strangely, of a calm ocean at dusk. The shuttle docks with a gentle clamp of metal against metal, and the door I had been struggling to open moments earlier now slides open on its own, revealing a boarding tube that stretches away into shadow. I don't move at first. I stand frozen at the threshold, manifest still crumpled in my hand, listening to the low hum of machinery that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Somewhere behind me, back on the station, alarms are surely sounding by now. Someone will have noticed a stray human logistics officer boarding an unauthorized shuttle. Someone will be scrambling to figure out where I've gone. But out here, alone in the boarding tube of a 60,000-year-old vessel, none of that feels like it matters at all. I step forward because staying still feels somehow worse. The tube leads to an airlock that cycles open without any command from me, revealing a corridor unlike anything I have ever walked through. The walls are smooth and dark, but not cold the way I expect metal to be. They feel almost warm beneath my fingertips when I brush against them, warm and faintly humming, like touching the side of a sleeping animal and feeling its breath. Lights bloom softly along the corridor ceiling as I walk, activating just ahead of my footsteps and dimming just behind them, as though the ship itself is watching where I go and lighting only the path immediately in front of me. I have no idea where I'm supposed to be heading, so I simply follow the lights, one careful step after another, listening to my own breathing echo faintly against the walls. The corridor eventually opens onto a much larger space, and I stop in the doorway, momentarily forgetting to breathe at all. The room stretches upward further than any single deck should allow, its ceiling lost somewhere above in soft blue shadow. Around the edges, Tall columns rise from floor to ceiling, each one etched with lines of the same flowing script the human researchers back on the station had been struggling to translate for weeks. In the center of the room sits a raised platform, and atop that platform a single console shaped like an open palm, exactly as the reports had described. This must be the bridge, I think, or whatever this civilization called the heart of their ship. I take a hesitant step inside, and the moment my foot crosses the threshold, the lights along the console flicker to life, brighter than anything I've seen so far, pulsing in a rhythm that feels almost like recognition. I freeze in place, half expecting alarms, half expecting some kind of automated defense system to activate and remove me the way one might remove something that wandered somewhere it shouldn't be. Instead, nothing happens except the lights continuing their steady, patient pulse, as if waiting for me to do something. I think about the 22 failed attempts. I think about Emperor Vareth Solmane, about Matriarch Issa Kire, about Warlord Crixdoth, each of them walking this same path with certainty, each of them placing their hand against that same console, each of them being turned away without explanation. What could a logistics officer possibly offer that an emperor couldn't, I wonder, and almost laugh out loud at the absurdity of even being here to ask the question. Still, curiosity gets the better of caution, the way it usually does with me, and I climb the few steps leading up to the platform, drawn forward by something I can't fully name. Maybe it's simple stubbornness. Maybe it's the fact that I've already come this far, and turning back now feels somehow more dangerous than continuing. I reach the console and hesitate, my hand hovering just above its glowing surface. Before I can decide whether to touch it, a voice speaks, filling the room from everywhere at once, low and steady, neither one thing nor another, carrying a strange quality that makes it feel both ancient and immediate at the same time. "State your intention," the voice says. I nearly fall backward off the platform. My hand jerks away from the console entirely, and I take an involuntary step back, heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't have one," I say, before I can stop myself. "An intention, I mean. I didn't mean to be here at all. There was a crowd, and a door, and a shuttle that wasn't mine, and somehow I ended up standing in front of you instead of delivering a supply manifest 2 decks up from where I'm supposed to be." The room falls silent, except for the low hum of the console lights. I brace myself for rejection, expecting the same darkening flicker that turned away every powerful figure who came before me, expecting to be quietly and efficiently removed from a ship clearly meant for beings far more significant than I will ever be. Instead, the lights along the console pulse brighter, and the voice speaks again. "You entered without preparation, without ceremony, without demand," it says. "Explain why you remain, when others far greater than you have already been turned away." I don't know what to say. My mind races through every possible answer, every impressive thing I could claim about myself, and comes up empty, because there simply isn't anything impressive to claim. I'm not a leader. I'm not gifted with any special ability. I don't come from a bloodline stretching back thousands of years. I'm just a person who happened to end up somewhere by accident and, apparently, lacked the good sense to leave immediately. I stayed because I was curious, I finally admit, my voice steadier than I expect it to be. And because I didn't have anywhere else to go in that moment. That's honestly it. There's no grand reason. I wasn't chosen for this. I wasn't sent here to prove anything. I just ended up here, and now I'm standing in front of you, telling the truth, because I genuinely don't know what else I could possibly offer instead. The silence that follows stretches long enough that I begin to wonder if I've somehow offended a machine older than most civilizations currently existing in known space. Then, slowly, the pulsing light along the console steadies into a calm, constant glow, and the voice speaks once more, quieter this time, almost thoughtful. "Interesting," it says. Before I can ask what that means, the entire room shifts around me. The tall columns lining the walls brighten in sequence, one after another, until the whole chamber glows with soft blue light. Somewhere deep within the ship, I feel rather than hear a low vibration begin, steady and powerful, like an enormous heart finally remembering how to beat after a very long sleep. Outside, though I cannot see it from where I stand, I know exactly what must be happening. Every sensor on every allied and rival ship in the debris field will be lighting up with the same warning, the same impossible message repeating across a dozen different languages and command channels at once. The ancient vessel that has spent an entire day rejecting emperors, matriarchs, and warlords has just, without any warning at all, chosen to awaken for someone else entirely. I stand alone on the platform, surrounded by softly glowing columns, staring at a console that has just accepted me in a way it refused 22 of the most powerful beings in known space, and I have absolutely no idea what I've just gotten myself into. The vibration beneath my feet grows steadier, more confident, spreading outward through the deck plating until I can feel it in my teeth. Somewhere far below, deep in the ship's core, systems that have lain dormant for 60,000 years are stirring awake, one by one, like an enormous creature slowly opening its eyes after an endless sleep. "State your intention," the voice had asked me, and I had answered honestly because I hadn't known what else to do. I still don't fully understand why that answer mattered, why simple honesty succeeded where certainty and power had failed 22 times in a row. But whatever the reason, the ship's response leaves no room for doubt. It has chosen me. Outside, unseen but easy to imagine, I know chaos must already be spreading across the debris field. Every empire that sent a delegate to attempt the trial of awakening will now be receiving the same impossible report, that the ancient vessel has activated fully, not for any of their chosen champions, but for an unranked human logistics officer who wandered aboard entirely by accident. I press my palm gently against the console, this time without hesitation, and the surface warms slightly beneath my touch, almost like a gentle handshake between two strangers who have just been introduced. "Welcome," the voice says, quieter now, almost gentle. "Welcome to what, exactly?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The lights along the chamber pulse once, slow and deliberate, as though considering how best to answer a question that clearly deserves more explanation than a single sentence could provide. "To a decision that will change more than you currently understand," the voice replies. I want to ask another question, but before the words can form, a sharp tone cuts through the chamber, unfamiliar and urgent, and the soft blue light along the walls shifts suddenly to a deeper, more alert shade of red. "Incoming vessels," the voice announces, its tone unchanged in warmth, but carrying a new weight of information. 7 warships have broken formation and are approaching this position at combat speed. My stomach drops. 7 warships. I don't need to ask whose they are. I already know that somewhere out there, across a dozen furious command channels, someone has decided that if they cannot win the ship through worthiness, they will simply take it by force instead. I grip the edge of the console, knuckles white, and for the first time since stepping aboard, I understand that whatever happens next is no longer a matter of curiosity or accident. It has become something far more dangerous, and whether I asked for this role or not, I am now standing directly at its center. "What do we do?" I ask, my voice tight. The lights along the chamber pulse once, steady and calm, entirely unlike the fear currently rising in my own chest. "We wait," the voice replies, "and we watch what they choose to become now that patience has run out." Outside, unseen but easy to imagine, 7 warships close in on a ship that has just, for the first time in 60,000 years, opened its eyes. The red light pulsing along the chamber walls matches the rhythm of my own heartbeat, fast and uneven, and I force myself to breathe slowly as I stare at the console beneath my palm. "Show me," I say, surprising myself with how steady the words come out. "Whatever you're tracking out there, show me what's happening." The air above the console shimmers, and a projection blooms upward, translucent and glowing, depicting the debris field in miniature. I recognize the shapes immediately, the golden hulls of the Caliph Dominion, the silver formations of the VN Matriarchy, the dark angular ships of the Shrath Hegemony. 7 vessels, drawn from at least 3 different factions, have broken away from their defensive positions and are now moving together, in a formation that looks nothing like an escort and everything like an assault. They're not coordinating with each other normally, I say, watching the projection closely. Factions that hate each other don't usually fly in formation. Fear does strange things to rivals, the voice replies. When a shared threat appears large enough, old enemies sometimes discover a temporary reason to become allies. The threat being you, I say. The threat being uncertainty, the voice corrects gently. They do not understand why I chose you. Uncertainty, left alone too long, tends to curdle into aggression. The 7 ships continue their approach, and I watch tiny markers on the projection representing weapon systems begin to glow amber, then a warning shade of orange, as targeting arrays power up across multiple vessels at once. Can they actually hurt this ship? I ask, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice and only partly succeeding. There is a pause before the voice answers, long enough that I start to worry the silence itself is the answer. This vessel was built to endure conditions far beyond conventional weapons, it finally says. However, endurance and invulnerability are not the same concept. I would prefer to avoid testing the difference unnecessarily. That's not exactly comforting, I mutter. It was not intended to be comforting, the voice replies, and for a strange moment, I think I hear something almost like humor buried underneath the calm, steady tone. It was intended to be honest. The projection flickers as the 7 approaching ships draw closer, close enough now that individual hull markings become visible even at this scale. I recognize the golden trim of a Caliph cruiser, the sleek silver curve of a Ven escort, and the blunt, brutal shape of a Shrath assault vessel, moving together in a formation clearly designed to overwhelm a single target from multiple directions at once. A new voice cuts through the chamber, broadcast from outside, translated instantly into words I understand, even though the original language is clearly not human. It carries the same cold authority I remember from the moment Emperor Vareth Solmane's shuttle first passed near our human crew. Unidentified vessel, the voice says, though I suspect it knows exactly what has happened here. You are ordered to power down and prepare to be boarded by joint authority of the Caliph Dominion, the Van Matriarchy, and the Shrath Hegemony. Failure to comply will be treated as hostile action. I glance at the console, unsure whether I'm supposed to respond, unsure whether I even can. Would you like to answer them? The ship asks, as though reading the question directly from my thoughts. Can I ask. If you wish it, the voice replies. This vessel will carry your words, should you choose to speak them. I hesitate only a moment before deciding that hesitation has already cost humanity enough today. I straighten, clear my throat, and speak as steadily as I can manage. This is Noah Bennett, I say, my voice echoing strangely through the chamber, before being carried, presumably, out across every channel currently listening. I'm a logistics officer. I didn't come here looking for this ship, and I don't have any claim to it beyond the fact that it chose to open its doors for me when it didn't open them for anyone else. I'm not asking you to understand that. I'm just telling you the truth, because that seems to be the only thing that's worked so far today. There is a long pause on the other end, long enough that I start to wonder if the transmission failed entirely. Then the same cold voice responds, sharper this time, edged with something that sounds almost like disbelief, bordering on insult. A logistics officer, it repeats, as though testing the words for some hidden meaning. You expect the assembled powers of 3 empires to believe that a machine built by a civilization older than recorded history simply chose a random, untrained human by accident. I don't expect you to believe anything, I say. I'm just telling you what happened, because it's the truth, whether you find it convenient or not. The response comes almost immediately, cold and final. Then you leave us no choice but to correct this obvious anomaly ourselves, it says. Prepare to be boarded. The connection cuts, and the projection above the console shows the 7 approaching ships accelerating, closing the remaining distance with clear and immediate intent. "They're not slowing down," I say, gripping the edge of the console tightly enough that my fingers ache. "No," the ship agrees, "they are not." "What do we do?" I ask again, my voice rising slightly, despite my best effort to stay calm. The chamber's red light pulses once, steady and deliberate, and the voice answers with a calm that somehow makes the moment feel even more serious, rather than less. "We demonstrate restraint," it says. "Watch closely, Noah Bennett. What happens next will teach you something important about the difference between strength that destroys and strength that simply refuses to be moved." Before I can ask what exactly that means, the entire chamber shifts around me. The pale blue lights lining every column brighten in sequence, faster now, cascading outward like a wave moving through the ship's ancient bones. Beneath my feet, the deep vibration I felt earlier intensifies, no longer a distant heartbeat, but something closer to a great engine, drawing its full breath for the first time in 60,000 years. Outside, invisible to me but easy to imagine through the projection floating above the console, I know the 7 approaching warships must be watching something extraordinary begin to unfold. A soft chime sounds, and the projection updates, showing a faint shimmer spreading outward from the ancient vessel's hull, expanding in a slow, deliberate sphere that swallows the surrounding debris field within its glow. "What is that?" I ask, watching the shimmer expand further, engulfing the 7 approaching ships entirely within its boundary. "A field," the voice explains. "Not a weapon, not an attack, simply a boundary, reminding anyone who crosses it that force is not the only kind of power worth respecting." On the projection, I watch as the 7 warships suddenly stop accelerating, their engines still burning bright, but their forward motion halted entirely, as though they had run headlong into an invisible wall far more solid than anything their sensors could have predicted. Confused chatter floods every open channel almost immediately, voices overlapping in a dozen languages, all carrying the same unmistakable tone of shock. Weapons that had been charging moments earlier flicker and power down on their own, their targeting systems apparently unable to lock onto anything within the shimmering boundary at all. "They cannot fire," the voice explains calmly, noticing my confusion. "Within this field, aggression simply fails to function as intended. It is not that I have taken their weapons. It is that I have made violence, for the moment, impossible to commit." I stare at the projection, watching the 7 ships drift uselessly within the boundary, their crews no doubt scrambling to understand what has just happened to systems that should have been fully operational moments earlier. "That's incredible," I say quietly. "It is also temporary," the voice replies. "This field cannot be maintained indefinitely without significant cost, and it does nothing to resolve the underlying tension that brought these vessels here in the first place. I have bought time, Noah Bennett, nothing more." "Time for what?" I ask. "For you to decide what happens next," the voice says. I blink, certain I must have misheard. "Me," I say. "You want me to decide." "You are the one I chose," the voice replies simply. "That decision carries consequences beyond simply standing on this platform. If you wish, I will explain further. If you do not wish to carry that weight, I will return you safely to your station, and this ship will return to its dormant state, and none of this will have happened at all." The offer hangs in the air between us, and for a long moment, I actually consider it. Going back would be simple. Going back would mean returning to crates of oxygen filters and supply manifests, and a life where nobody expects anything extraordinary from me at all. It would mean letting someone else, someone more qualified, more prepared, more suited to leadership, figure out what to do with a ship that has just demonstrated power capable of freezing an entire attacking fleet in place without firing a single shot. But even as I consider it, I already know I'm not going to choose that option, and the realization surprises me almost as much as everything else that has happened today. I want to understand, I finally say. Before I decide anything, I want to understand why you chose me instead of any of them. I think I deserve to know that much, at least. The lights along the chamber pulse warmly, and for the first time since I arrived, the voice's tone carries something unmistakably close to approval. Then let me show you, it says, why 22 of the most powerful individuals in known space walked this same path and failed, while you succeeded without even trying. The projection above the console shifts again, no longer showing the trapped fleet outside, but instead displaying something far older, images of a civilization I don't recognize, cities built from the same dark, seamless metal as the ship around me, skies filled with vessels far larger than anything currently orbiting the debris field. This is who built me, the voice says quietly. And this, it continues, as the images shift to something darker, something clearly catastrophic, is why they are gone. I watch, transfixed, as the images show a civilization brought to its knees, not by conquest or war, but by something far more subtle, an assumption of permanence, a belief in their own strength so absolute that they never prepared for the possibility of losing it. They believed dominance was safety, the voice explains. Every emperor, every matriarch, every warlord who approached me today carried that same belief without realizing it. Each of them assumed worthiness meant power over others. None of them understood that the trait which destroyed my creators was not weakness, but exactly that assumption of dominance they each carried so confidently into this chamber. And I don't carry that, I ask quietly. You have spent your entire life adapting to circumstances beyond your control, the voice replies. Overlooked, underestimated, never once in a position to demand anything from anyone. That experience, Noah Bennett, taught you something none of today's failed champions ever needed to learn. It taught you how to endure without needing to dominate in order to feel secure. The words settle over me slowly, heavier than I expect, and for a moment, I don't know what to say at all. Outside, the trapped fleet remains motionless within the shimmering field, and somewhere among those ships, I know furious voices are already demanding answers, already searching for some way to reclaim what they still believe should rightfully belong to them. Whatever happens next, the voice says quietly, will not be decided by force. It will be decided by choice. Your choice, Noah Bennett. And I suspect, before this day ends, every empire currently watching will finally begin to understand exactly why that distinction matters more than they ever imagined. The projection of the ancient, ruined cities fades slowly from the air above the console, replaced once again by the tense image of 7 warships still frozen within the shimmering boundary outside. I stand quietly for a moment, letting everything I've just seen settle into place, before a new sound draws my attention, a familiar voice crackling through a smaller, separate channel that the ship seems to have opened just for me. Noah, can you hear me? The voice says, and I recognize it immediately as Grace Whitfield, tight with worry and barely restrained urgency. Grace, I say, relief flooding through me at the sound of something familiar. I'm here. I'm okay. There's a pause, filled with static, before she speaks again, her voice lower now, more careful. We saw the field activate, she says. Every sensor on the station lit up at once. Command wants to know exactly what's happening over there, and I told them I'd get answers before anyone does anything reckless. So, Noah, what exactly is happening over there? I glance at the console, then at the frozen fleet still displayed in the projection, and try to figure out how to summarize the last several hours in a way that won't sound completely insane. The ship woke up for me, I say slowly. Not for any of the delegates. For me. And when a group of warships tried to force their way in, it stopped them, without hurting anyone. Another pause, longer this time. That's not possible, Grace finally says, though her tone suggests she already suspects it might be exactly that impossible and exactly true at the same time. I didn't think so either, I admit, but I'm standing here, and it's real, and I don't fully understand it myself yet. Static crackles across the channel as Grace seems to consider her next words carefully. "Listen to me," she finally says. "Whatever is happening on that ship, whatever it's decided about you, this is bigger than logistics now. This is bigger than our station. Every empire out there is going to want answers, and some of them are not going to like the ones they get. You need to be careful, Noah. More careful than you've ever needed to be in your entire career." "I know," I say quietly. "I'm trying to figure out what careful even looks like right now." Before Grace can respond further, the ship's own voice returns, calm and steady as always, cutting gently into our private channel. "If I may," it says, addressing both of us at once, "there is a way forward that minimizes further conflict. However, it requires your cooperation, Noah Bennett, and it requires patience from your commanding officer as well." Grace goes quiet, clearly startled by the ship speaking directly to her, and I take a slow breath before answering. "I'm listening," I say. The projection shifts once more, this time displaying not the trapped fleet, but a wider view of the entire debris field, showing dozens of ships from a dozen factions, all currently holding position at a cautious distance, all no doubt watching the frozen fleet with a mixture of confusion and calculation. "The 7 vessels currently restrained will remain contained for a limited time," the voice explains. "During that window, I recommend opening direct communication with the assembled delegations, not through demands, but through explanation. Force has already failed them today. Perhaps understanding will succeed where force could not." "You want me to talk to them?" I ask, feeling a fresh wave of nervousness settle into my chest. "To an emperor, a matriarch, and a warlord, at the same time." "To all of them," the voice confirms. "Together, if they are willing. Separately, if they are not." Grace's voice returns, careful and measured. "Noah," she says, "you don't have to do this. Command can send someone more experienced, someone trained for diplomatic situations like this." The ship's voice answers before I can. "Experience matters," it agrees. "But in this particular circumstance, the deciding factor was never experience or training. It was character. Replacing Noah Bennett with someone more conventionally qualified would defeat the very reason this vessel awakened at all." I let that settle for a long moment, feeling the weight of it pressing down on my shoulders, heavier than any supply manifest I've ever carried. "All right," I finally say, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounds. "Open the channel. Let's talk to them." The projection shifts one final time, and suddenly I'm looking at a series of smaller windows, each showing a different figure, each instantly recognizable from the reports I'd watched scroll across screens just yesterday. Emperor Vareth Solmane, his golden armor still gleaming, despite clear exhaustion in his expression. Matriarch Issa Kir, calm on the surface, but with something sharp and calculating behind her deep, still eyes. Warlord Krixdoth, silent and unreadable as ever, watching me with an intensity that makes my skin prickle even through the projection. "Explain yourself," Emperor Vareth says immediately, his voice carrying barely restrained anger beneath its formal tone. "Explain how a machine, built by a civilization far beyond either of our current understanding, chose an untrained human over every prepared, worthy candidate presented to it today." I take a slow breath, remembering everything the ship showed me only minutes ago, and choose my words as carefully as I can. "I don't think it was about being prepared," I say. "I think it was about something else entirely. This ship was built by people who eventually destroyed themselves, not through weakness, but through an assumption that their strength made them untouchable. Every one of you approached this trial, certain that your power, your bloodline, your mastery, made you the obvious choice. I think the ship was looking for someone who didn't carry that same assumption at all." Matriarch Yissa's expression shifts slightly, something unreadable passing behind her calm exterior. "You are suggesting our strength itself disqualified us," she says, not quite a question. "Not your strength," I say, "just the belief that strength alone should be enough to claim something like this without question. Warlord Crick speaks for the first time, his voice low and rough, carrying none of the polished formality of the others. "And what does a logistics officer believe should be enough?" he asks, the question carrying an edge that feels almost like a genuine challenge rather than mockery. I think about it for a moment before answering, aware that whatever I say next will likely be remembered and repeated across a dozen empires for a very long time. "I think restraint should count for something," I finally say. "This ship had every reason to defend itself against 7 warships with lethal force today. Instead, it simply made violence impossible for a limited time, without destroying anyone, without punishing anyone permanently. I think that says more about what it values than anything any of us could have said walking into that chamber with demands." Silence follows, stretching long enough that I begin to wonder if I've said too much, overstepped some boundary I don't fully understand yet. Then Emperor Vareth speaks again, quieter this time, some of the anger drained from his voice, replaced by something closer to genuine consideration. "And what do you propose we do now?" he asks. 3 fleets remain in this system, each with legitimate historical claim to a discovery of this magnitude. You cannot expect us to simply withdraw and leave everything to chance. I glance at the console beside me, and the ship's voice answers before I can, calm and steady as ever. "No one is asking you to withdraw entirely," it says. "What is being asked is that force no longer be treated as the deciding factor. This vessel possesses knowledge, technology, and history that could benefit every faction present, provided that benefit is pursued through cooperation rather than conquest." Matriarch Issa tilts her head slightly, studying the projection with renewed interest. "And you would permit this cooperation?" she asks, directing the question toward me rather than the ship itself, which surprises me more than I expect. "I would want to understand what cooperation actually means to each of you," I say honestly, before I could promise anything like that. "I'm not interested in simply replacing one group's control over this ship with another's. If there's a way forward here, I think it has to look different from what any of you originally came here expecting." Warlord Crick studies me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before speaking again. "You realize," he says slowly, "that many among my people will not accept this outcome easily. Pride does not surrender gracefully, even when reason suggests it should. I understand that," I say. "But I'd rather have this conversation now, honestly, than pretend everything is settled just because one attempt at force already failed. I think we both know there could easily be a second attempt, unless something changes about how this whole situation is being approached." The 3 delegates exchange glances across their separate projections, an unspoken conversation passing between rivals who clearly still don't fully trust one another, but who also seem to recognize, however reluctantly, that today's events have shifted the entire situation beyond anything their original plans had accounted for. "We will need time to consult with our respective governments," Emperor Vareth finally says. "This is not a decision any of us can make alone." "That's fair," I say. "Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this ship." The transmission ends shortly after, each delegate's projection fading one by one, until only the wider view of the debris field remains, showing the trapped fleet still motionless within the ship's protective field, and beyond them, dozens of other vessels holding position, watching, waiting, recalculating everything they thought they understood about power, worthiness, and the strange, quiet human who has somehow ended up at the center of it all. Grace's voice returns through our private channel, quieter now, almost impressed despite the exhaustion clearly evident beneath it. "That was either the smartest thing I've ever seen someone do under pressure," she says, "or the single most terrifying risk I've ever watched a member of my crew take without any authorization whatsoever." Honestly, I say, I'm not entirely sure which one it was either. The ship's voice returns, calm as always, though something in its tone feels almost warm. "For what it is worth," it says, "I believe it was both." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, watching the projection of the debris field slowly settle into an uneasy, temporary calm. Somewhere out there, three of the most powerful factions in known space are now quietly reconsidering everything they assumed about strength, dominance, and worthiness, all because a logistics officer wandered onto the wrong shuttle at exactly the wrong, or perhaps exactly the right, moment. Whatever happens next, I think, gripping the edge of the console tightly, this is no longer simply about who claims an ancient ship. It has become something far larger and far more delicate than any of us fully understand yet. The uneasy calm doesn't last long. Barely an hour after the three delegates end their transmission, promising careful consultation with their governments, a new alert flashes across the projection above the console, sharp and urgent, pulling my attention away from the quiet relief I'd only just begun to feel. "Additional vessels approaching," the ship announces, its tone calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of seriousness. "Not from the factions you spoke with. A fourth party, previously unengaged, has entered the debris field at high speed." I lean forward, watching the projection resolve into a formation I don't recognize at all. Sleek, dark ships, bearing no insignia I've seen among the earlier delegations, moving with a precision that suggests military discipline far beyond anything casual. "Who are they?" I ask, my pulse already climbing. "A faction that did not send a delegate to attempt the trial," the ship replies. "They appear to have been observing from a distance, waiting to see how today's events unfolded before committing to any action of their own." "Waiting for what, exactly?" I ask. "For weakness," the ship answers simply, "or for an opportunity created by the exhaustion of others." The dark ships continue their approach, ignoring the trapped fleet still frozen within the shimmering boundary, moving instead on a direct course toward the ancient vessel itself. Grace's voice cuts back into the private channel, tighter than before. "Noah," she says, "station sensors just picked up the same formation. Command is scrambling for information, but nobody recognizes those markings. Whoever they are, they're not part of any faction we've dealt with so far." I grip the edge of the console, watching the projection update in real time as the newcomers close the distance with alarming speed. "They're not slowing down," I say. "No," the ship confirms. "And unlike the earlier attempt, I do not believe words alone will be sufficient to resolve this encounter peacefully." My stomach tightens. "What do we do?" I ask, the same question I've asked more times today than I ever expected to ask in my entire life. "This time, the choice is more complicated," the ship says. "The field I used earlier requires significant energy to maintain, and expanding it to fully contain this new formation risks leaving the previously restrained fleet unguarded, free to act the moment my attention shifts elsewhere. There is a second option, but it carries greater risk and greater responsibility than anything asked of you so far today. Tell me," I say, without hesitation this time. "I can allow the newcomers to dock, unopposed," the ship explains. "And I can permit direct communication, allowing you to speak with them the same way you spoke with the earlier delegates. This carries risk, because unlike Emperor Vareth or Matriarch Issa, this faction has shown no interest in dialogue so far. However, it also offers the only path toward resolving this without further escalation." "You want me to meet with them, face to face?" I ask, feeling my throat tighten at the thought. "If you are willing," the ship says, "I will remain close throughout, and I will act if genuine danger presents itself. But the choice of how to proceed belongs to you, exactly as it has since the moment you first stepped aboard. I think about Grace's warning from hours ago, about being careful, about the weight of consequences I still don't fully understand. I think about Emperor Varys' exhausted anger, about Matriarch Issa's calculating calm, about Warlord Crix's rough, challenging question, and I think about everything the ship showed me, about a civilization destroyed not by weakness, but by an unshakable belief in their own untouchable strength. Whatever this new faction believes about power, I suspect it isn't so different from what the others believed either. All right, I finally say, let them dock, I'll talk to them. The ship doesn't respond immediately, and for a moment I wonder if it's reconsidering. Then the pale blue lights along the chamber pulse once, steady and reassuring. Then let us meet them together, it says. Minutes later, the dark ships slow their approach, clearly surprised by the unopposed docking clearance suddenly granted to them. I watch through the projection as one vessel detaches from the formation and moves toward the same docking arm my own stolen shuttle used earlier, disappearing from view as it connects with the ship's hull. I make my way down from the platform, following the same softly lit corridors that guided me here originally, until I reach the boarding chamber where the newcomers will arrive. The wait feels endless, every second stretching longer than it should, until finally the airlock cycles open, revealing three figures I don't recognize at all, tall and angular, wrapped in dark armor unlike anything I've seen from the other factions, their expressions unreadable behind sharp, narrow visors. The one in front steps forward first, studying me with obvious disbelief. This is what an ancient intelligence chose over the combined might of 3 empires, the figure says, voice cold and flat, through some kind of translation device built into the armor. I straighten my shoulders, despite the fear still coiled tight in my chest. Apparently so, I say. I understand that's hard to believe. It was hard for me too, honestly, and I'm the one it happened to. The figure studies me a moment longer before speaking again. We did not send a delegate to your trial because we do not believe worthiness should be determined by an ancient machine's arbitrary judgment, it says. We believe strength determines who deserves such power. And so we have come to claim what should belong to whoever proves capable of holding it. I feel my stomach drop, understanding immediately what kind of claim that likely means. You're here to take the ship by force, I say, not really a question. We are here to demonstrate that force remains the only judgment that ultimately matters, the figure replies. Everything else is simply a story the weak tell themselves to feel significant. Before I can respond, the ship's voice fills the chamber, calm but carrying unmistakable weight. Then allow me to offer a different demonstration, it says. The lights throughout the entire vessel shift suddenly, brightening in a wave that spreads outward from the boarding chamber, through every corridor and chamber I've walked since arriving. The floor beneath us trembles, not with the low hum of earlier, but with something far more powerful, an unmistakable awakening of systems that have remained hidden until exactly this moment. The 3 armored figures shift uneasily, clearly sensing the change as well. I have shown patience today, the ship continues, its voice resonating through the entire structure now, not just the chamber we stand in. I have shown restraint. I have offered dialogue where conflict seemed more likely. None of that should be mistaken for an absence of strength. It should be understood as a choice, made freely, by something entirely capable of far less patient alternatives. Outside, through a nearby viewport, I watch as the entire hull of the ancient vessel begins to glow, pale blue light spreading across every seam and line, transforming the ship from something merely impressive into something unmistakably formidable. The lead figure takes a half-step back, though clearly trying to hide the reaction. You would risk conflict with 3 empires already circling this system, it says, testing the ship's resolve. I would risk nothing, the ship replies calmly. I would simply remind everyone present exactly why my creators built me strong enough to endure, long enough to matter, and wise enough to know that endurance without wisdom is precisely the failure that ended their civilization in the first place. Silence stretches through the chamber, heavy and absolute, until finally the lead figure lowers its stance slightly, some of the aggressive posture draining away. And the human, it finally asks, nodding toward me. What does he offer that raw strength alone could not have provided instead? I answer before the ship can, surprising myself with how clear and steady my voice comes out. I offer the willingness to ask questions instead of assuming answers, I say. Every single faction that approached this trial today assumed their strength entitled them to whatever they wanted. I didn't assume anything, I just told the truth, and I listened when the truth was told back to me. Maybe that's not as impressive as raw power, but apparently it mattered more than any of you expected. The figure studies me for a long moment, then glances toward its companions, some silent understanding passing between them that I can't fully interpret. "We will withdraw," it finally says, voice carrying obvious reluctance. "For now, but do not mistake this retreat for acceptance." Many will still question whether a single accidental choice should determine the future of something this significant. That's fair, I say. I question it myself, most of today, if I'm being honest. But I'd rather earn whatever comes next, through actions, not through claims of superiority nobody's actually tested against genuine cooperation yet. The figure doesn't respond further, simply turning and leading its companions back through the airlock, disappearing the way they came. Minutes later, through the projection above the distant console, I watched their formation withdraw from the debris field entirely, retreating back into the deeper dark from wherever they originally emerged. Grace's voice returns through the private channel almost immediately, filled with something between exhaustion and disbelief. "I don't know how you just did that," she says, but command is losing their minds trying to figure out how to even categorize what just happened out there. I lean against the nearest wall, feeling the accumulated weight of the entire day finally settling into my shoulders all at once. "Honestly," I say, "I'm still trying to figure that out myself." The ship's voice returns, quiet and steady as it has been throughout everything that's happened since I first stumbled aboard. "You have made a series of choices today that many far more powerful individuals could not," it says. "Not through strength and not through certainty, but through honesty and restraint." I believe, Noah Bennett, that this is precisely the beginning my creators hoped for, even if they never lived to see it themselves. "What happens now?" I ask quietly, watching the debris field slowly begin to settle outside, ships from every remaining faction holding position at a careful, respectful distance. "Now," the ship replies, "we begin the far more difficult work of proving that today's choice was not simply an accident, but the start of something worth building carefully, together." Over the following days, word of what happened in the debris field spreads across every major faction in known space, carried through official channels and quiet rumors alike. An untrained human logistics officer, chosen not for power or bloodline, but for honesty and restraint, now stands at the center of a discovery every empire once assumed would belong exclusively to whoever proved strongest. Negotiations begin cautiously, awkwardly, full of suspicion on every side. Emperor Vareth Solmane remains skeptical but engaged. Matriarch Issa Kir watches carefully, clearly still calculating every angle. Warlord Krixdoth, surprisingly, becomes one of the more consistent voices, arguing that today's outcome, however unexpected, deserves a genuine chance rather than immediate dismissal. And through it all, I remain aboard the ancient vessel, no longer simply a logistics officer counting crates of oxygen filters, but something else entirely, still uncertain exactly what that means, still learning alongside a ship far older than every empire currently arguing over its future. Humanity, once barely tolerated at the edges of galactic affairs, finds itself unexpectedly seated at the center of the conversation, not because we demanded a place there, not because we proved ourselves through conquest or overwhelming strength, but because the last quiet voice of a civilization that destroyed itself through unchecked pride looked across 100 worthy contenders and chose, instead, the one person who never once expected to be chosen at all. I still don't fully understand everything that happened that day, or everything still unfolding in its aftermath, but standing quietly in the chamber where it all began, watching the pale blue light pulse steadily along ancient columns older than most civilizations currently alive, I understand this much clearly enough. Sometimes the strongest choice available isn't the loudest one in the room. Sometimes it's simply the quiet decision to stay honest, stay patient, and keep listening, even when everyone around you assumes those qualities could never possibly be enough.